people will join as we go.
Cool, we're live.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining. This is Graph Index or Office Hours number 7. And we have a few guests today, and we're going to do something slightly different. Given there was an announcement yesterday around the grants, we're going to dedicate part of the session today to running through all of the grants and giving people an opportunity to either talk a little bit about their grant and what they're doing, what they plan to do, or B, if there's a grant that you usually think is interesting or you know something about and you'd like to talk about, then you can interrupt myself or Alex at any point and we'll talk about it. But just to kick things off, we'll get through our usual agenda items and start with our Ethereum Node Watch, where we just take a moment to check in and see if there's been any software updates in preparation for the forks that are coming up. So we have the Berlin upgrade coming up in around the 14th of April. In the last few weeks, we've had quite a lot of updates for the nodes, but to my knowledge, I haven't seen any new node releases come out in the last week or so. Has anybody else seen anything new that we need to be aware of in that space?
There was a new TurboGeth release 6 days ago, but nothing. You got it, Alex.
Yeah, we're just finalizing it. Like, we synced it and we're now about to test it. I still don't know if it works for like mainnet, because not sure if you're aware of it, but TurboGeth didn't have like pending transactions tracker or whatever the hell it's called. So whenever it tried to estimate the gas, it failed and the node crashed. Hopefully that's fixed now, but I'm about to find out in like a few hours.
Has that specific problem, has that caused you problems on mainnet, Payne? Because I know you're having problems with TurboGeth.
I can't close allocations. I can't open allocations with TurboGeth on mainnet. It only works for indexing. It doesn't work for like network operations. Got
it. So is there an assumption that that's going to be fixed in this coming release?
Yeah, hopefully. I'll find out and I'll let you guys know, probably in this chat, or like if like either here in the chat or like in the next meeting. But, yeah,
okay,
I'll keep you
brilliant.
posted.
So that would mean that TurboGeth sort of sits in the same feature list as Geth, right? In terms of you can run it as an archive, you can't do tracing, but you can do everything else.
It's not necessarily about tracing, it's that it can't send transactions. Just like you can, for example, with Open Ethereum, you can close allocations, you can send transactions from the agent, and then like, yeah, TurboGeth doesn't have that. Goldberg, do you know if regular Geth works with that? I guess the gas estimates and stuff.
It does. I think like basically you can use TurboGeth for indexing, so you can point graph node at TurboGeth, but you cannot point indexer agent at TurboGeth.
Yeah.
Right.
If they fix that would be amazing. Just imagine having an archive node syncing in 2 days with like 1/10 of the space needed for it. It's brilliant.
What am I going to do with all these NVMEs I've bought then if that happens?
And now imagine it has traces as well, which
those are for your subgraphs now, Jim.
I know, right? For a gigantic Postgres database with 6 replicas. Okay, let's move on from the ETH node chat and let's move on to our regular repo watch section. Stake Machine has put a bunch of interesting stuff into the Office Hours chat, but just before that, Seb, I just want to know if you had anything you wanted to highlight in the repo watch section before we move on to Stake Machine's piece.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't really follow the repos this week.
Okay, no problem. It's pretty clear that Ford and Giannis, I've been very busy over the last week. I don't know if anyone else tracks the repo, but my my inbox is just full of PRs and various things. And I guess that's what these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 PR requests represent. So, Ford, would you be the best person to sort of talk through these in in whatever manner you see fit?
Hey y'all, I can speak to a few of them. So I worked on, let's see, 212, 216, and I'm not seeing maybe the other one. But basically, one thing that you guys will hopefully enjoy is added transaction management configuration tools. So one problem we've had with the indexer agent in the past that some of the indexers have reported is transactions getting stuck, often due to like low gas prices. So the miners are not picking up that transaction. So this adds a robust retry mechanism that you can control the gas increase factor and the timeout. So after a transaction hits that timeout, it'll bump the gas price and resubmit the transaction with the same nonce, replacing that transaction in the pool. It also adds some control for max gas price if you don't want to have your transactions go over a certain price, as well as number of attempts.
Is there also a way?
Before I talk about the other one, maybe you guys can just ask any questions about that one.
Seb?
Right now, to close allocation and reopen allocation, right, with 2 separate transactions. And if this would be like one combined transaction that we could try with very low gas prices, and then we just wait for a day or two for it to go through, and we could save a lot of money on this, I think.
I don't know if that's implemented, but it's in the works.
Yeah, that's something I'm working on as part of my grant. I can speak about that a bit later. So this PR doesn't implement a reallocation. So there's still a separate close and a separate open.
Okay.
One thing I guess to mention on this PR, if I'm still correct for it, the last time we spoke about this, is this functionality will not persist across restarts of indexer agent. So the pending transactions are just stored in memory and then kept track of. So if you've got pending transactions and you're looking to leverage this mechanism, don't restart your indexer agent.
Correct. Yeah, it's best not to, but I've tried to handle those edge cases with basically error handling that'll catch those. But to your point, there are some future updates to make this more stateful, so the agent will, or at least the idea is the agent in the future will keep track of all pending transactions and submitted transactions and successful transactions, and be able to use the database to manage them in a more robust way across restarts. If does anyone have any other questions about how to use that transaction management?
I think it's going to be a matter of getting our, using it practically on testnet to get a feel for how it works, right?
Yep. You guys, I think it'll make sense to you once you get into it. But as always, ask questions on Discord, and I'll be around to help you out.
It looks like it's just more command line parameters, right? And this also translates to environment variables that we can set in Docker containers, I guess. Is it correct?
Yep, that's correct. There are reasonable defaults, but I would suggest looking into it and doing testing on testnet, and then aligning that with your strategy on how fast you want transactions to go through and how much you are willing to pay for each transaction.
Just wanted to say thank you for implementing this. It was much needed, and I'm sure it will help a lot of people.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, I think we all owe Ford a beer once this is implemented on mainnet.
Yep.
I cannot wait to share a beer with some of y'all. Been looking forward to it for a while.
Okay, so that covers 2.1.2. So 2.16, Ford, I think we may have talked about this feature in the past.
Yeah, so 2.16 is just some updates to the POI monitoring, but just a summary of that overall feature is if you turn it on in your agent, the agent will look at closed allocations and generate a reference proof of indexing to compare with the POI that was submitted on chain by the other indexer. And by doing so, can identify mismatches in that POI. And in those cases, those are potential disputes. So your agent will identify those, save those to your database, and then you can use the indexer CLI. There's a new command called disputes get to list all the potential disputes, and then submit any that you think could be valuable.
So this is disputes that you have identified on the subgraph, or I'm just trying to understand the flow here. If we have this table in our database, is that a network-wide, would everybody have that in their database, or is it's dependent on your actual infrastructure?
So it is somewhat dependent on your infrastructure because your graph can only really generate valid POIs for subgraphs that you're indexing. So basically, a summary of the process is your agent will query the subgraph for closed allocations. It'll then compare the POI on those allocations with ones it generates itself. And if it sees discrepancies, it'll flag those as potential disputes.
Right, interesting. So when we're thinking about, further down the line with the sort of the fisherman process, is it likely that fishermen will have, would need to have this capability themselves in order to start being proactive within the network? So they would need to be indexing huge numbers of subgraphs and, keeping an eye on all of those subgraphs and the POIs to try and find disputes? Or do they work is that a completely different field?
So you're correct. Yeah, the fisherman would need to have all the subgraphs it can actually check against. And so as we move forward, ideally, many of you will be doing this monitoring on your own infrastructure. And you're incentivized to do so because you can get paid for successful disputes, as well as that's increasing the security and validity of the network. And then you can submit that dispute and a fisherman will verify it. We have more information to release about how that fisherman will work, but that will be run by EduNode, I believe, in the short term, and then will be decentralized moving forward in the medium to long term.
Interesting. So on other networks like ETH2, where they have the concept of a slasher, it's quite a expensive process in terms of compute. Could we expect this to be, setting aside obviously the indexing itself, will this be quite an expensive process if you're trying to compute and compare loads and loads of POIs?
Yeah, in short, yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the future and the capacity. Is it something you could run on your existing infrastructure? Do you need to scale up your existing, service providing infrastructure as well in order to make sure that you're not impacting it by trying to also play this role of, detecting issues with the disputes or the POIs?
Yeah, it's an extra load on your infrastructure. So the graph node, if you're indexing a specific subgraph, it's always keeping track and continually generating that POI. So that work is already being done. But then you do need to query that and do so with the specific indexer address that had submitted the original POI. So, and there's a bit of low hanging fruit that we still have to maybe do things like batching and improve that efficiency. But yes, overall, you can expect there to be a bit of additional load for these processes.
Yeah, got it. Okay, I want to keep the momentum going here, guys, because we've got quite a lot to cover. We have these other pull requests. Is there anybody else on the call who can talk to any of them? 218, 220, 2315?
I think for 218 we need Yanis.
Zach might be able to speak a bit to that, but although I didn't work on it, I can provide an overall summary. And basically, it's increased throughput and robustness of the payment system. And I believe there's some big gains there. So I'm pretty excited to see that being tested on the testnet with you guys.
Is that part of the upgrade that was just announced for the testnet?
I believe it is, yeah.
Okay, good.
Ford, I don't know if you'll know the answer to this on 218, but so under the hood, yeah, 218 swaps out Nitro state channels for Connect's Vector, which is awesome to see. Really, really cool. But obviously, those are incompatible state channels implementations. So, do we know what that switchover might look like in production, given that the gateways, will be trying to make state channels payments against different implementations potentially?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the gateway will be able to know whether you've upgraded to the new payment system, and will only choose indexers which have.
Makes sense. Thanks.
This is also reduces the need for load balancing across multiple indexer services.
That's a good question.
Yep.
Probably to some extent.
Is that a question about payments? I'm not sure that I understand the question.
So right now, in order to scale up the throughput, we need to spin up more service nodes. Even if it's on the same machine, having more service nodes with a load balancer in front of them makes them scale a lot more than just having a single one. So the question was, is this implementation going to solve that problem of throughput by removing the need to have multiple indexer service nodes? But I guess that one's for Yanis.
Yeah, so I'm working on a change right now which is going to greatly increase the throughput capacity of a single indexer service process. That's not yet being released on the testnet, but should be available very soon. Although the throughput will be greatly increased, I don't know that it'll be increased to an extent where you would want to not have the load balancer.
Okay, that's still great news. Thank you.
All right. What do we have left? So we've covered the vector node stuff. Does 220 fall underneath that as well? Add asynchronous native signature verification methods to speed up the indexer service. I guess it does.
Yes, it does. But that's not on the testnet yet, I thought. Maybe it is. I don't think we merged that.
No, it's still open.
Okay, so yeah, when that is merged, and then one other one, that's what's going to increase the throughput of the indexer service.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
And that throughput increase is around signature verification pertaining to payments.
Yes, that's right.
Cool.
Okay. Any other questions or any other repo watch stuff that people want to discuss? I noticed Pat has got a question here at the bottom of the chat. Anyone know what's up with PancakeSwap not being able to use Graph on BSC? My impression that it was. Does anyone have any comment on that? I wish Cohen was here to talk about it.
They are having a bit of trouble with their high volume of transactions, the low block time, and the fact that they simply copied the Uniswap subgraph over. So we're trying to work with them to update the subgraph and figure out how to increase the throughput of the BSC nodes we're connecting to, and overall optimize to get that to a place where it can sync in a reasonable amount of time.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's basically like not super efficient. The Uniswap subgraph isn't efficient at all, so yeah.
Yeah, the Uniswap subgraph is usually just very slow to sync by itself. Just imagine like having twice as fast of a block time on top of the slowness.
5 times as fast, I believe.
Yeah, I was about to ask, isn't it a bit more than that?
Yeah, that and the gas limit is significantly higher per block, so it's a lot.
That was very insightful. Let's move on to the governance section. Usually we'll have a proposal of the week to discuss, but given the activity around governance in the last 2 weeks, we'll talk, I guess, about GIP2 again, although we did talk about it last week. I know that we completed the upgrade on Monday night, so people can now redirect their rewards to a separate address where they'll have immediate access to the rewards. And we've seen a few people do that already. It seems to be working as expected. However, I think we all know it was a very difficult process to get to the point where GIP2 was implemented. And part of the fallout from that is that a few delegators were tracking 5 in March unstaked. Sorry, go ahead.
You said delegators, indexers, they unstaked.
Yeah, so 5 delegators, 5 indexers unstaked in March. We're just tracking on chain and on the subgraphs and trying to identify who it was that who unstaked and figure out, just get some feedback from them on, did they unstake because, they basically reached their limit in terms of waiting for the reward unlock or some other reason. At the moment, we've identified a couple of indexers who did unstake for that very reason, and a guy by the name of Zorro, who is a mod on the Grafana Telegram channel, has started an initiative to sort of track these indexers and reach out to them, see if they are interested in coming back, and seeing what we can do in terms of an information initiative to help delegators understand how these indexers were impacted by the delay in unlock rewards, and including some communications once identified to help these indexers in terms of being targets for delegation. Zorro wasn't able to join this week to discuss this. He may join us next week. But I would also like to open this up to anybody. If there's anybody on here who did go through the unstake process and wants to talk about it on any, from any dimension, you're welcome to do so now.
I plan to come back. I can just say that.
That's good to know, Pat. So Zorro's reached out to you, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Pat, did you have delegators, or you were just having your own stake?
I only had 2 delegators who I don't know personally, and if they want to reach out to me, I'm happy to work with them and figure out some compensation or whatever they need or they feel like they need to, be made whole.
And so in general, when someone unstakes the delegators, they also get undelegated automatically? Or
No,
No.
not automatically. It's they have to do it manually.
So if we look at the actual on-chain data, between the time that Pat unstaked and when I started looking at the subgraph data, most of his delegation moved. There's one other delegator that's more at risk, where there's about 300,000 GRT delegated that's just sitting there. So part of this communication initiative is to try and raise awareness that this is what the situation is currently, so that delegators have a chance to see that this is what's happened and what we're doing to try and make amends around the problem.
I mean, if the indexer comes back after 28 days and restakes, I guess they don't really have to move. And I think,
No.
I think that's already a week in or something like that from the time they unstaked. So I believe it's better to just stay in at this point.
Yeah, more than likely, it's you're weighing things up, right? It's dependent on whether you were just planning to completely disengage or not. The other indexer we've identified with this 300k delegation is coming back, and for them it was also a decision that had to be made in order to, cover business costs, indexing business costs. But their plan was always to come back. So now it's just a matter of communicating that to the delegator community, which is what Zorro intends to do.
That's good to know.
It's in general kind of a not optimal situation that you as a delegator, you make the decision to support someone, let's say, like out of your best.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is one of many things that we need to look at in terms of improving the protocol. So we've just gone through making a change that was historically always meant to be in place for indexers. So from my point of view, thinking, with my council hat on, the next thing I would like us to start focusing on is similar things, similar vein of improving the protocol for other stakeholders. So for example, looking into the proposal to change the way the cooldown system works, and looking at how we might help delegators when they're stuck in a situation where they're currently delegated to a delegator that might be put under the banner of bad behavior, so that they can get out from under it, without having to wait 28 days. Those are the types of things that I think we'll be looking at next. But again, it's up to the community. It's 100% up to the community and what the community wants to focus on.
That's true, but it's also maybe difficult. Like, let's say it goes well for half a year, and then you just don't care as a delegator anymore, and then you're not staking because your indexer just gave up. Somehow you have the responsibility to check back all the time.
True. I mean, there's a line, right, of responsibility, and we need to understand if it's correct today. I don't think for that specific situation, maybe it is, but there's other areas where I think we need to prove that, we need to bring the line forward or backwards, to make the system a little bit more user friendly in the delegator space.
No, I definitely agree.
Maybe it can be easily solved by have some kind of alarm service that you can just subscribe to.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there's actually at least one of those in the grants, which we'll cover in a minute. We've got about half an hour left. I think that will be enough to cover the grants section. So let's move on to looking at the grants that were approved in Wave 1. Just opening up the web page. All right, so 4 different sections: protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps and subgraphs, and community building. The first one, protocol infrastructure, for a total of about $1.2 million. The first one up is Cubes automation with ChainStack. Myself and Ford know quite a bit about this one, but what I think I might do is see if we can get Eugene from ChainStack onto the call in one of the coming weeks, because he has some questions around what indexers would like to see in terms of Cubes automation. This grant is all about, if you know ChainStack, who are sort of a SaaS provider of ETH nodes and various other validation nodes. They're looking to improve the Cubes automation on all types of platforms, whether it be cloud, your own physical compute, or otherwise. So we'll see about getting Eugene on the call to talk about that in the future. Another cubes abstraction one, easy to stake. And this one, if I look at the details, is all about creating an infrastructure deployment tool using a mix of automation technologies such as Terraform, cubes, and Helm charts. This one sounds quite similar to me. Ford, were you involved in the interviews for this one, by any chance?
No, that was Giannis, actually.
Yeah, that was Yanis.
Okay, so I don't have any further info about that, unless anyone else on the call does.
So they're trying to bring the whole setup for setting up an indexer using cubes with Terraform over to like bare metal and whatever kind of other setups you want to, because right now most of the stuff that we have and most of the documentation that is built around Google Cloud, and they're trying to fix that using Helm and Terraform.
Yeah, so it sounds very similar to what ChainStack are doing. So it'll be interesting to see what the different solutions they come up with look like. Okay, Ansible automation with one of our OG mission control testnet indexer, Stake Machine. Stake Machine, do you want to talk a bit about this?
Yeah, I think I already introduced this grant before, so it's just in a few words. It's a Docker-based Ansible automation, so you just need SSH enabled on a bare metal server, and whole stack will be installed with the one command.
Excellent. Is that on one server? Or do you have any options to deploy bits to different servers?
It's MVP was built in mind with the multiple servers, so I need to change a bit to run it in a single node, so everybody can try it in testnet without multi-nodes infrastructure, but it definitely will use different approaches for testing, maybe for production, so everything will be configurable from the configuration files, so you can choose any architecture that you want.
Awesome. What's your delivery timeline like for this grant?
I think some kind of single node will be ready in a week, and multi-node is pretty tough task, so I think a month or so.
Great, I look forward to seeing that. Okay, moving on to the next one. Thanks, Stake Machine. Indexer install suite from Cohen, who is another mission control OG. Install suite for different types of operators, especially those with bare metal and lower level entry experience relative to K8s. So for those that don't know, Cohen did a lot of the sort of original bare metal scripting for mission control back when all we really had at the time was the cubes deployment, which a lot of us were just very much out of our depth with, or maybe we didn't want to use Google Cloud. So Cohen scripts back then were very useful for getting set up in the early days of the mission control testnet. So I think what he's doing is sort of formalizing that into an install suite. It's a pity he's not actually here today to talk about it. But yes, formalizing that into an install suite, depending on how you want to operate your indexers. And next up, we have yet another mission control OG, Chris Wessels with Indexer Agent Improvements. Chris, this is probably about the fourth or fifth time you've gone through your plans, but for posterity's sake, we'd be glad if you'd explain what you're planning to do again.
Yeah, absolutely, with pleasure. The kind of first exercise that I will be undertaking is simulating some of the different optimization strategies that we can take in the way that indirect indexer agent interacts with the contracts on chain. So today, it's pretty naive. Indexer agent just opens and closes allocations one at a time, and each open and close is a single transaction. And there are all sorts of functions on the smart contracts that would allow us to have indexer agent interact with the chain in a more gas efficient and intelligent way. So the first project is going to be trying to quantify some of those gas savings by simulating those interactions on chain, and adding up the gas usage and actually quantifying that if we swap out an open and a close for a single atomic close and allocate, then the gas savings on that set of interactions will be about 10%. That much I know today. But there are a bunch of other functions as well. So for example, you can batch close allocations. There is not yet any smart contract functionality to batch open allocations. And so this work may result in a JIP to propose some changes to the smart contracts. But of course, before we go down that road, we want to be clear that the gains are worth the effort that goes into it. So yeah, but starting with the simulations, and then I'll get into implementation. I would ask that if anybody has done modeling or has thought deeply about the churn that indexers will likely have across their subgraph allocations. So for example, would probably expect that a large number of subgraphs will kind of consist in their allocation, but some other subgraphs, depending on indexer strategy, will churn and will get dropped off. So if anybody has modeled that and has an idea of what that might look like in terms of percentage split, or even just wants to chat about it, that would be really helpful, because it will help me to kind of lay out different scenarios within the simulation. But yeah, looking forward to it, and looking forward to working with many of you on it as well.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, Chris. If it really, if it comes down to it bears fruit, basically. What did the timelines look like? It sounds like really your first phase is research and modeling before we're making any sort of JIP.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, exactly. So I hope that the simulations will be ready quite soon. I've actually already implemented close and allocate within a fork of indexer agent, which is what I'm running on mainnet, and that's consistently saving me about 10% in gas per reallocation. But the code's a little bit raw, and before kind of pushing that out, I think we want to take a more formal process of simulating and evaluating the savings before we invest in solid implementation. But yeah, I hope that the simulation will be done in the next couple of weeks, and then we can kind of, on the basis of what the simulation says, scope out more implementation work.
Excellent. So we can keep we can talk about this every week if you like, if there's reason to bring this up and get more coverage in terms of finding people who might be working on the same thing. Maybe there's grants going on that are working in the same area as well. I'm not sure. I know there's some big research grants that are looking at the indexer behavior as well as other stakeholder behavior, and they might potentially be able to able to help in terms of insights around the indexer behavior piece.
Yeah, totally. Looking forward to collaborating.
Great. Okay, let's move on to the last one in the protocol infrastructure section, indexer performance R&D with Sommelier protocol. We have Zaki on the call today. Just as way of an introduction, Zaki is the co-founder of Occlusion and has been a critical contributor to the Cosmos validator ecosystem since the very beginning, as far as I ever remember. And has been leading the delivery of inter-blockchain communication for Cosmos, which is, it's just happening now in terms of implementation. And is an advisor to many blockchain companies out there you might follow, so you'll probably see Zaki's name in various places. And Zaki's going to talk to us today briefly about what Sommelier is, what Sommelier is using the graph for, and the research grant work that they'll be doing around graph query performance. So Zaki, if you want to start with just what Sommelier is, you've got people here that are mostly familiar with DeFi, understand a bit about liquidity provisioning, and are very interested to hear what Sommelier is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sommelier is a protocol designed to sort of the mission of Sommelier is to sort of improve the sort of tooling infrastructure available to liquidity providers. And so, right now we have an app that is launched, Uniswap V2, that provides sort of portfolio management and sort of a bunch of smart contracts that assist with usability. But the overall vision is we are, sort of the thing that we are concerned about and are worried about is, especially as we sort of migrate to this Uniswap V3 world, that being a liquidity provider is increasingly becoming something that is only accessible in sort of specialized players like we see in conventional markets. And we want to really build tools that and we think that more than just making another user interface or portfolio, you really need a network of validators to process data, monitor positions, and sort of provide sort of interactive management of and programmatic management of liquidity positions. And so this is a very sort of data intensive process. We have been battling it out, indexing Uniswap V2 with the graph, and improving the amount of data that sort of we sort of had made the strategic choice that we're going to make the graph indexing software a key piece of what it is the validators on the Sommelier network run, and we're sort of very interested in the performance of the graph on these sort of high volume, high throughput smart contracts and environments. And so the concerns about how much resources it takes to keep up with the Uniswap subgraph resonate a lot. And what we're doing is we're building a team inside of our the Sommelier community of engineers who are going to be focused on just indexer performance and getting and being able to handle these being able to improve the experience for all of these things, all of these sort of high volume, high value DeFi smart contracts. Was that a good summary?
Yeah, that sounds great to me. So can you talk a bit about, or maybe it's too early, but what are you looking to sort of focus on around the research work? I understand that Sommelier is very it's going to be very latency sensitive, right? So you need the data at the top of the chain as fast as possible. Is that where you start your focus?
So we have a couple of areas where we're focused. So we spent about 2 weeks in this year already researching basically everything that we could do, and you probably saw me in the Discord starting to do research on what we can do to improve reindexing performance, because we are both latency specific, but we also think historical data is going to be very important, both for our, sort of the user experience, but also for validators who are participating in the protocol. And so the reindex performance is also something that we're really every time you change your data model, every time you want to kind of compute a new parameter, et cetera, spending right now it takes about 7 weeks to sync the Uniswap V2 subgraph from scratch. And these are things that we think there's an enormous amount of opportunity to improve on. We've done some initial analysis. We've been talking with the Edge and Node engineering team about opportunities there. And what this graph is allowing us to do is just dedicate human capital to this to maxing out performance and sort of just specifically focusing on the node. The latency questions are also relevant to us, and we want to make sure they go hand in hand with trying to focus on both aspects of these things.
Got it. So back when I first spotted you in the TurboGeth channel, looking at performance for Uniswap's syncing, is there good? Are you focusing on specific node software? So TurboGeth as an example, over something maybe a little bit more incumbent like Open Ethereum?
Yeah, I mean it's a relatively good question. Our initial thing that we've been focusing is on reindexing performance, and I think the TurboGeth potentially supports the reindexing performance use case the best. But I'm looking for more advice from people who are more experienced with running graph indexers, like you all, about where should we be focusing our energy, and what we should be recommending as Sommelier gets built out. I'm also, as we sort of get into a testnet procedure and move towards launching the protocol on mainnet, we are going to be reaching out to you guys to see if you guys are interested in being validators as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I'm hogging all of the questions here, so if anybody has any, interrupt me. But I understand right now in your private testnets, you're probably running sort of independent graph nodes.
We're running independent graph nodes right now.
So is it on the roadmap to move that to graph mainnet, or are you going to stick with independent nodes for your first release or whatever?
I do not have an answer to this question. I'm still figuring it out is probably the best answer to the question. Because the proof of indexing mechanism that exists in the graph mainnet seems like not something we want to recreate. And that seems to me to be like a key value proposition of the graph mainnet. But I want to see how that fits into the sort of overall picture. But I would like our validator, I would like the nodes that are running in our network to be running in the graph mainnet, and I would like our validators to sort of increase the number, to provide it's sort of like a synergistic set of incentives, right? If you're already running graph nodes, it's probably one of the heavier pieces of the Sommelier stack, and so you should be is one of the heavier pieces of the Sommelier stack. And so, it's one of the it should be one of the easier onboarding to onboard into the Sommelier network as a validator, and provide sort of additional incentives and opportunities to participate in networks for rewards in this community.
Absolutely. I think you'll find a lot of positive feedback coming back from this group in terms of people that would be interested in getting involved in the testnet. Most of the people on this call, they're all on the graph testnet as well as mainnet, and then a bunch of other testnets. Agoric is the talk of the town right now, where a lot from Graph and indexers in the Graph are involved in the Agoric testnet, for example. So we're glad to have you, Zaki. Thanks for coming on today. Just one more question.
Yeah, I expect to be here regularly. So,
Chris, you had a question?
Well, it was more a request for a recurrence of this. There's so many questions that I'd love to ask about that optimization process, and I guess the one comment I would make is from the testnet experience and the heavy indexing that we did there. It seemed that the synchronous latency between the graph node and the ETH node was a huge factor in indexing speed. Just as a side note, but would love to hear more about the kind of specific routes for optimization that you research and implement over time.
Yep.
We're running out of time here quickly, and I want to make sure that we cover off some of the other grants that we have some representatives here for. So I might zoom through here a little bit and pick out some specific ones that are worth highlighting. In the tooling section, the Graph Network Telegram bot from Ryabina is a good one. I use the Ryabina Telegram bots myself on substrate-based chains, so Polkadot, Edgeware, Kusama, and various other chains. That's going to be a very useful tool for all stakeholders to monitor their stake, essentially. Someone earlier, Seb, I think you mentioned, if delegators aren't paying attention, this would be a good service that could actually ping them and tell them that their indexer hasn't settled, or, their indexer is unstaked, for example. We have another one here for Stake Machine. Steak Machine, what are your plans for extending the Grafana dashboard?
First of all, it's just open sourcing the exporter for Prometheus data, and then we'll work about new data for subgraphs, curators, as soon as they will become available. So new dashboards will show more data and more insights about new activities that we will have with the more subgraphs arrive.
Great, that sounds good. What else do we have? GraphScan.io from Ryabina, well-known dashboard, so I guess they'll be updating the features in that dashboard. Graphlets.io from Staking Facilities. So they'll be updated. I've seen some concepts for that. Looks really interesting. They've got some interesting dimensions on data that has thought of. That'll be an interesting one to see develop. DAP query, more mission control OGs. So it looks like they're going to be upgrading their existing graph section that they have on DAP query. What else do we have? One that I'm hyped for, the graph in the dApps and subgraph section, the graph community NFTs, POAPs, POAPs, proof of attendance protocol. Get badges for attending various things or for having been on chain for some specific event. Basically NFT hype. Gamifying things like governance and participation in testnets, that sort of thing. And I want to get to Stefan's part before we run out of time. So I'm going to zoom all the way down to the community building section. And Stefan, who's who Graph Academy is Stefan's brainchild, he's going to talk a little bit about the launch of Graph Academy. Just as an introduction, Stefan has a master's degree in marketing management, has made his first steps in the area of crypto during the 2017 craze, and is excited about Graph's vision of becoming part of a vibrant, decentralized future where data is easily accessible. Stefan, welcome.
Welcome. Well, thank you, Jim, for giving me the opportunity today to speak a little bit about what a couple of us have been working on during the last months. And as you may have noticed already in the Discord server from the public announcements, we have launched today with the Graph Academy. And it was really important for me to take the time and present the idea behind the Graph Academy to all of you, seeing that most of you are pretty heavily involved with the protocol, with the community. So obviously this is also me trying to win you over as contributors, as editors for the Graph Academy, because everyone is welcome to join. And it's a community initiative for the community, by the community. And basically what we are trying to build is what we are trying to build is a free, open source and community-driven knowledge base and documentation initiative on the Graph network. And one key challenge that we have identified is that right now the ecosystem lacks a single go-to resource for community-driven documentation. So everybody is publishing their own documentation over at GitHub, over at Medium, and there's no one single go-to resource where we can send people that have joined the network, that have already existing experience with the network. There's no single resource we can all send these people to learn and advance their knowledge about the ecosystem. And the second challenge that we have identified is that onboarding new participants is extremely difficult if there's no single go-to resource for community participants. So if there's a large influx of new members like we have seen in the last month, it's really valuable to have this go-to resource where people can be sent over and have all the documentation, all the guides and all the tutorials available to basically learn the graph and master the graph. And what I have noticed from the participation in the server is that whenever we fail in the onboarding process, the entire ecosystem will suffer as a consequence from it. So It's really important to help new community members to get onboarded with the graph and to quickly learn what is necessary to learn. And now I would like to invite all of you over. I will send an invite link to our Discord where we organize, where you can submit content ideas, where you can actively participate in the Graph Academy. And with that, thank you, Jim, for giving me the opportunity. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer these.
Great, Stefan. Thanks very much. Very, very proud to be part of this. One question I have is, what type of community members are you looking for? I think it's worth noting that this is about bringing contributors together, right? We're not trying to build another graph community here, like a base community. It's specifically about contributors, right?
Exactly. So we have this two-tier approach where on the one hand we publish really visually appealing guides over at the graph.academy, which at the moment are especially targeted at new individuals and people in the ecosystem who are not as experienced, but we also want to win over technical contributors. So for example, we have Payne, who has written his Docker guide, and he has published it or he has made a pull request to our GitHub repo over at GitHub, and this content is automatically synchronized to the Graph Academy. So we also want to win over technical contributors as well.
And we already have a large base of material that people have been linking in the Discord already, for anyone who's looking for information on specific topics.
Exactly.
Okay, any other questions for Stefan before we wrap up for today? All right, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody who's contributed. Thank you for all the guest speakers, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.